So as mentioned, my name is Joel Mulpeter. I am the Director of Product Marketing for Crestron in the Asia region. And today I want to chat to you guys about zero-touch meeting rooms and how we can use AV technology to really minimize touch points and get the best out of our meeting rooms. Just before I dive into that, I want to talk about who Crestron is and what we do. So Crestron is a leading manufacturer of advanced control and automation systems. We build technology that's really integrates unified communications, AV presentation, and environmental systems that helps to deliver smarter buildings. Our products are backed by more than 91 offices around the globe, and we provide sales, support, and training in those offices. So today we're talking about enabling the new normal in the modern workplace. So there's a few new guidelines that we need to adhere to in our modern workplace. That is remote working. We need to support people that can work now externally and still be able to collaborate just like they're in the meeting room. We need to support social distancing in our meeting spaces, just changing the physical outlay of them. And then we also need to make sure that we promote the protocols around safety and cleanliness. So how does technology help? Well, we can enhance the user experience to make sure that when people do have meetings inside of these spaces, be it remote, be it with social distancing, that the user experience with the AV technology doesn't change, and if anything, enhances. And we also need to improve our space utilization. Spaces are changing, the physical meeting spaces in the office, and we need to make sure we can support those changes. And then finally, creating that flexible and intelligent workplace that also protects our investments. As we make changes to these workplaces, we need to make sure that that investment is protected. We can use that technology in the future and further on. First off, minimizing touch points. I want to talk about how we can take a meeting room and we can minimize the touch points in that room. So touch points being anything we have to physically touch inside of that meeting room to conduct and collaborate. So first off, AV technology can be touchless. We can have meetings today that require no need to touch any of the physical AV equipment inside of that meeting space. There's a couple of design standards we need to deploy to do that. There's a couple that I have here, and we're going to break these down in a minute, but being wireless presentation from personal devices, the ability to see the room status visually just at a glance, and then overlaying occupancy detection as a data point on top of that to have actions happen inside the rooms automatically. So first off, wireless presentation. These days inside of meeting rooms, when we walk in and we want to collaborate or share content, often the first thing we do is we pick up a cable or a dongle and we plug it into our personal device, our laptop or our phone, whatever we have on us at the time. That's considered a touch point. That is something that we need to touch inside of that meeting room that other people prior to us, and really then requires cleaning to make sure that it's not a transmission point. Wireless presentation gets rid of that. Wireless presentation allows us to use just our personal device and use the software that's on that device to present to the screen without needing to use that cable or that dongle. This is using protocols like Miracast and AirPlay, all the technologies that Windows laptops and Apple devices have today by default to present our content onto the display. When we do this, we need to ensure that we retain the high quality video that we had when we had the cabled solution. We also need to make sure that we have low latency. Latency being the time it takes for the content on my main display I'm using, my personal device, to appear on the meeting room display. There can't be a huge gap in there. And then we also want to make sure that we can leverage the existing network. We want to make sure that when we walk into these meeting rooms, that we're on the same corporate network we're on to do our everyday work. We have so many services in the cloud these days that walking into a meeting room and disconnecting off the corporate network to a separate wireless presentation network is just simply not workflow. The other thing we're going to look at is room booking. So you can see in the top right corner of this slide, there is a room booking panel. It's a fairly standard room booking panel. What we can do with this is it allows us to have visual cues as to a room's status. So obviously this room booking panel shows us the current meeting information. We know who's got the room booked, how long for, and whether there's a meeting right after it. That next meeting information lets us know that we may, there could be a meeting back to back with that one, so we might need to move to another space. This stops us from having to, touch door handles, open up rooms and say, hey, how long do you have this booked for? Gives us all the information at a glance. And then in addition, we get the room status. So you can see the green bars on the side of that panel, and in the bottom right-hand animation, you can see that red and green indicator at the top. These are cues that let us know that the room is booked or not booked, but at a glance and at a distance. Now we can look down a hallway of meeting rooms, for example, and we can see a whole bunch of green or red signs to let us know whether rooms are or aren't booked. Occupancy detection is another element we can deploy inside of meeting spaces that gives us two key benefits. First off, system efficiency and space efficiency. System efficiency is all around saving energy because what we can do with the occupancy detection is we can turn the systems on or off so that when people walk into the space, the system simply turns on. From a touch point perspective, this means we don't have to have a power on and off button or a touch screen to interact with. We could just simply walk in, use occupancy detection to turn the room on, and then when we leave the space for some amount of time, say 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we can have the technology turn off as well. This obviously helps our technology to last longer and it makes the room an on-demand service. In terms of space efficiency, taking again that simple concept of occupancy detection, but overlaying that over the booking information. By taking that occupancy detection and knowing that someone hasn't turned up to a meeting room, we can cancel bookings on behalf of them and we can free spaces up so they're released back into the pool for someone else to book. This is hugely important when we get into the hybrid working model where some people are working from home and some people are in the office or may change from day to day. Meeting rooms will be booked and people won't turn up to them and we need to free those back up to the pool so people can actually utilize that physical real estate. So that's 3 design standards that help us to design the zero-touch meeting spaces. But there are still spaces that have some sort of touch in them. These are typically complex spaces that involve video conferencing and other services that we need to use touchscreens or buttons or cables for. Maybe they might have lots of video inputs on them. These are what we try to call low touch spaces, and these can still be taken care of in the new normal. Really, that comes down to the cleanliness of the space and making sure that we can actually clean those devices so that they're still protected. We strongly suggest that when you are cleaning devices, AV devices inside of a meeting space, that you follow the manufacturer's instructions. This is because they are a mixed medium. Touchscreens, for example, inside of a meeting space, they're a mix of plastic, glass, and glue to hold it all together, and certain cleaning chemicals can have different effects on that. You follow the manufacturer's instructions, everything will be perfectly fine, and you can keep those spaces as clean as they need to be to protect your staff. From there, you should also consider automating cleaning schedules or possibly even sending alerts if rooms aren't cleaned. This makes sure that the uptake of the cleaning happens all the time and that the space is always looked after. The next thing I want to talk about is the new way of meeting and meeting in the virtual world. The business has pivoted incredibly fast when lockdowns happened. We went from most people being in the office and the exception to being outside for meetings to everyone being outside of the meeting room. Everyone was a work from home attitude. We did this by leveraging platforms like Microsoft Teams and Zoom that allowed us to still have the meetings we needed to have and then make sure that we could still collaborate in the way we needed to. As businesses return, meeting is going to become hybrid. What I mean by hybrid is you'll have a percentage of people in the office and a percentage of people outside of the office. This adds a little bit more unpredictability to it and makes it a bit more complex because now we need UC in a lot of spaces. We need to make sure that people can have those UC calls when they need to. They can still meet just like they're in the office, and the people external don't feel like a third party. So with this, we've seen a few trends. This is rethinking the traditional UC deployments. Really what we want to see in meeting spaces is UC enabled in every space. We had UC at home when we did the work from home attitude, and as we return, people should be able to walk into a meeting room and still have a UC call, being unified communications. The only catch with that is UC is not in every space. Typically, it's only in the larger boardrooms or the large conference rooms, and there's a cost impact with deploying that across an entire facility. And there's also then the time and the people power involved in that. If you need to deploy UC, which might be in only 20% of the spaces across all meeting rooms, it's obviously very costly, and typically the same budgets exist and the same amount of people exist to deploy that. So we've seen a couple of innovative solutions come out. First off being UC-enabled carts. So the first picture you can see there is a cart that has a UC system mounted to it. What that means is that we can roll that into a room, give it power and network, and it's a UC-enabled endpoint. No installation into the physical room, and typically these systems are about 1/3 the cost of deploying a UC space and installing it all inside the room. And the great thing about these carts is they have standard UC technology on them, so sometime later in the future, you can take the equipment off that cart and install it inside of the physical room when the time's right. The other trend we've seen is the adoption of BYOD, being bring your own device. BYOD is this concept that we have soft codecs running on our laptops. That's Teams and Zoom. We use those when we work from home. We didn't have UC systems. So being able to utilize those codecs and those soft codecs inside of the meeting room is very important as well. That means we need the microphone and speakers and cameras in the room to connect to that laptop. So that BYOD concept of walking from room to room and just plugging in USB is a trend a lot of people are deploying. Then also have the option of native codecs. Native codecs would be a room that is dedicated to doing really nothing but Teams or Zoom calls, for example. The hardware in the room enables that, and we do not need any physical laptop inside of the space. That works for a lot of environments, a lot of workplaces, but really you want the best of both worlds. You want to be able to have a native codec like Teams in the room or Zoom, and then support the ability for people to walk into a laptop and do calls through Google Meet, DingTalk, or any other platform that they choose to use, using their laptop as a soft codec. So having that dual support in a room is really important. And then the last topic I want to talk about is space management and protecting investments. So meeting spaces, the way we saw them was huddle spaces were on the rise, and they have been on the rise for a long time. You know, meeting rooms have been getting smaller, and people have been deploying these small 2, 4, 6-person meeting rooms. With the new 1.5 meter rules and other things that workplaces are deploying and governments are enforcing, huddle spaces are becoming less popular. And that's simply because they're not big enough. You cannot have a 1.5 meter rule and still have a 4-person meeting room. You would have one person in that meeting room. So what we expect to see is a wave of flexible spaces that are going to require the equipment to be repurposed and rebuilt into that space. When we look at this flexible deployment and this need to possibly take gear from one size of room to another, we should be thinking about the network. The network is the most flexible bit of infrastructure we have inside of an enterprise today. You know, for most of the time, it spans the entire facility and it gives us that intelligent I/O at all the points that we need it. AV over IP technology is a concept where we take video sources, just like in a standard meeting room, a laptop, for example, or a wireless presenter, and we use the network to send that to the display instead of over a dedicated cable. This AV over IP technology encodes and decodes the video, but all on the corporate network at 1 gigabit technology. It does this with incredibly high quality video and audio and no perceivable latency. But what it allows us to do is create a flexible matrix that, say, for example, might be a room that's got 5 inputs in it and 2 displays. And tomorrow we might reconfigure that room that space to be 2 individual spaces across 2 displays. We do all of that without adding any extra hardware, just reconfiguration on the network, because again, that network is incredibly flexible. And then lastly, rapid and remote deployment. You know, spaces need to be deployed quickly in this new workplace. We also need to make sure we can support them just like we could previously, and that we can remotely deploy. So we do that using cloud technology. Cloud technology, you know, services in Azure, IoT platform, for example, allows us to deploy systems without ever touching the devices, putting all their settings, into the cloud. When the device gets plugged in, it pulls all its configuration down from the cloud. Manage devices by pushing settings and updates to them, and then monitor and support them. You know, these days we're not going to be able to have people run into meeting rooms to support. We need to make sure we can remotely support all devices deployed as AV. And then ultimately evolve as well. We need to make sure that when we have all these devices connected to these cloud services, that we aggregate data from that and we use that to make decisions around our AV technology in the future. So thank you all for your time. Please drop by the Crestron booth, the virtual booth in this session, and yeah, come and ask any of our sales guys any questions on this detail.
Thank you, Joel. In fact, I'd like to request Andy Swan, the conference chairman, to unmute and have his video on. Andy, I understand you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. That was really interesting, and I think what we're hearing from something like this is obviously a lot of changes are coming into many businesses at the moment, and it's great that there's technology here to enable that change, and like you say, can be really rapidly deployed. But I'm just wondering, do you have, you know, if an organization does suddenly need to rethink their meeting space and that kind of virtual physical crossover, what if there's one place that you would recommend they start to understand, you know, is this something they should really kind of invest in or push the agenda on? Like where's the absolute starting point?
Yep, so as an assessment of the existing meeting spaces and really how they're used. I think that's the most important thing. You need to build use cases around your meeting spaces. There's lots of technology out there. There's lots of different ways that people meet, but you've got to define how the customers, your customers, the people using the meeting rooms, expect to work inside of those spaces, how they expect to collaborate. Is that over unified communication such as Teams? Is it person to person? Do they need to share content or do they not? And what type of content? Often meeting rooms are content like Excel spreadsheets, for example. That's where that high quality video comes in, because Excel spreadsheets are quite detailed. Or are they sharing high quality video? Media companies, for example, that need to produce high quality 4K content. Again, sharing that inside of the meeting space is a use case to build around.
Absolutely. And do you see any kind of consistencies across all different types of organizations, or is it very much individual organization by individual organization, the way they kind of need to adopt and deploy this kind of solution?
Yeah, certainly the consistency we saw pre-COVID was those huddle spaces. The consistency we're seeing afterwards is people wanting to have more and more unified communications. And obviously that is just direct response to people working from home and needing to support the same kind of meetings. When we were all in the office, it was good. When we're all out of the office, it was good. If it's hybrid, half and half, the rooms need to support those functions still.
Absolutely. And do you think that kind of hybrid approach is a trend that's going to continue, or do you see kind of more people coming back to the office or more remote working? What's your opinion?
Big mix across industries. We have customers, for example, that are 100% back. They tend to be manufacturing and those kind of services. And then we have, tech companies that are saying you never have to come back at all, and education that's sitting somewhere in between. So it really just does depend on what the business does.